This video is sponsored by Brilliant. Right up there, just off the handle of the Big Dipper, is the Pinwheel Galaxy. And I know it's right there because I'm pointed at it with this DSLR and lens right here and can see it on my screen after just a 20-second exposure. What's really difficult to grasp is just how far away that galaxy is. It's 21 million light years from us. A light year is a measure of distance for how long it takes light to travel in 1 year in the vacuum of space. And 1 light year is equivalent to about 6 trillion miles or 9.5 trillion kilometers. So when we say that the Pinwheel Galaxy is 21 million light years away, that means if we could travel at the speed of light, which we can't, it would still take 21 million years to get there. So I don't have any hope of ever visiting the Pinwheel Galaxy, but I can photograph it. And it's a face-on spiral galaxy, meaning we can see its structure, its beautiful spiral arms, and those arms are made up of 1 trillion stars in total. And what is so cool about living in 2025 is we have the techniques to photograph this galaxy with normal photo gear that you may already have, or you can buy used for a few $100. My name is Nico Carver, and you are watching Nebula Photos. So let's start by breaking down the gear I'm using tonight piece by piece. Let's start with the camera. I'm using this camera called the Canon Rebel T7. In other countries, it's called the Canon 2000D. It can be found starting at around $200 used on eBay. Any DSLR or mirrorless camera that you already have is perfectly fine. So if you're just starting astrophotography and you already have a camera that can take on different lenses, no need to buy a different camera. If you are buying a camera, newer cameras are generally better when it comes to having lower noise sensors, but that has plateaued a bit, so really any camera made in the past 10 years is pretty good. Sensor size doesn't matter that much with deep sky astrophotography, at least not for a beginner. For most use cases, an APS-C crop sensor will work just as well, if not better, than a full frame sensor for a beginner, as we're usually going to crop in on the object anyways, if you're using a lens like this one, and crop sensors will often have smaller pixels than full frame sensors, and smaller pixels will provide slightly better detail at a given focal length. And then there are two other things I would pay attention to if buying a camera and thinking about using it for astrophotography. One is this camera, the T7, has a fixed screen, one that doesn't flip out at all, which I'll admit is a bit annoying because it means if an object is high in the sky, like the pinwheel is right now, I have to get down like this and crane my neck upwards at a pretty uncomfortable angle just to see the screen. So a camera with an articulating screen can be a neck saver for sure. But the cameras with flippy screens also tend to be a little bit more expensive than the ones with fixed screens. So definitely something to think about before buying a camera for astro. For some people, a fixed screen is going to be a deal breaker, especially if you have any kind of flexibility or mobility issues. Another thing is you need a camera that can take a series of photos one after another without having to touch the camera's shutter button each time. In deep sky astrophotography with digital cameras, we do something called image stacking to build up the exposure. And that means we need to take many photos of the object during the night, and we don't want to be touching the camera to take each one of those photos because for a number of reasons. One, it gets really old to do that if you're taking 100 photos or more. And then also it will add vibrations to your photos and cause some shake. And that could also mess with the accuracy of the star tracker as it's tracking the sky. Again, so we need to take a series of photos automatically without touching the camera. And there are 4 main ways that cameras can achieve this. One, many cameras, especially common in Nikon and Sony models, have an interval timer mode built into the menu, so you just put it on that mode, put in the settings you want, and start it, and it's simple as that. 2, many cameras have a remote port that you can attach an external shutter release like this one, or an intervalometer to, and the Canon T7 has that, so that's what I'll be using tonight. 3, many modern cameras can be controlled over Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, and then you can get an app that can control the camera wirelessly. I haven't done as much of that just because I find having to use an app annoying, and sometimes they drop connection, things like that. But with some cameras, that may be your only option. And for many cameras, especially Canon and Nikon, can be controlled by a computer if you tether the camera with a USB cable. And this opens up using the camera with a laptop and specialized astronomy software, or a mini computer like an ASI Air if your camera model is compatible with that. So the point here is, if you're picking a new camera, just make sure it can be controlled by at least one of these methods to give you automatic capture. But ideally, to give you lots of choices down the road, the camera would work with any of these methods. Tonight, I'm going to go with the very simple method for control, which is just a mechanical shutter release that I picked up for 10 bucks. And to make this work, I just put the camera into continuous shooting mode and then lock this switch right here. And then the camera will continue taking pictures until I stop it by releasing that lock. Other than that, there are just a few settings we want to set on our camera here. In the menu, we want to set the image format to RAW. If there is any option for long exposure noise reduction, we want to turn that off. When it says auto rotate, also turn that off. And we want to turn the screen brightness initially up to maximum brightness so we can really see things when we're trying to find objects and focus on the stars. Then on top of the camera with our mode dial, we want to set this to M for manual. And in the quick menu here, I'm going to start with an ISO of 6400 and a shutter speed of 5 seconds. We'll raise the shutter speed once we've found the target and want to start our sequence of images, but 5 seconds is a good setting for the initial step of focusing on the stars and finding the galaxy. The lens I picked here is the Ter 3, which is an old Soviet lens you can buy from sellers in the Ukraine and other places for around $150 US. 150 to 200. There's many different versions of this lens. There's like the Ter 3S, the Ter 3C, the Ter 3A. I think optically they're all very similar. I have the Photo Sniper version produced between 1965 and 1969. It's a prime lens at a fixed focal length of 300 millimeters at f4.5 wide open. Another good cheap option if you're shooting Canon would be the Canon 75 to 300 zoom lens, which goes for about $80 US, and maybe a little bit actually easier to use than the Ter 3. The Ter 3 is pretty heavy, and then we'll also often need some little fixes to the mechanics to actually get it working well for astro. Those fixes aren't difficult, but if you are sort of not someone who usually does DIY kind of stuff, I maybe wouldn't recommend it. The reason I picked the Ter 3 is I'm actually working on a review of it for astrophotography, and I will say it is a pretty sharp lens, even wide open at f4.5. The downside is it does have some chromatic aberration, as you might expect from an older lens. But if you can get one for under $200, I think it's an interesting value to have a prime lens at f4.5, 300 millimeter focal length. And you can use it with any camera. You just need to find the right adapter to go from the M42 screw threads to whatever flange your DSLR or mirrorless camera uses. There are a lot of older DSLR lenses that aren't made anymore and are now pretty cheap on eBay as people have been upgrading their lenses and things. So it's any kind of telephoto lens can work for this task. I would probably for galaxies be looking at least 200 millimeter focal length and up. So if you already have a telephoto lens with at least 200 millimeter focal length, use it. No need to buy anything new. Okay, next up we have the star tracker. Again, if you have a star tracker already, use whichever one you have. But I want to highlight two possible options here. One is the OG star tracker, which is a 3D printed kit you can buy and put together yourself, or even 3D print yourself. What I'm showing here is version 1, but I just saw the inventor Andrei Gezhdash at NIF, and he showed me version 2, which looks even better. And it is still quite affordable at around 215 euros, or possibly even cheaper if you 3D print it yourself. Another good option, and the one that I'll be using tonight, is the Skywatcher Star Adventurer. It is widely available used in the US. If you search on eBay, you'll find many listings to buy the Pro Pack used for between $200 and $400 US. If you get the Pro Pack brand new today, it is $520 US at the time of recording. And regardless of which star tracker you get, what a star tracker does is it lets you shoot the sky for longer without star trailing. And that's really nice for shooting a galaxy and anything you're shooting at slightly higher focal length so that we can do longer exposures with sharp details on these dim objects without those details in the galaxy blurring due to the Earth's rotation. Now, we could just make the exposures very short, like 1 second each, and stack many exposures, like thousands of exposures. And in that case, we would not have to use a star tracker. I've made many videos on that technique already. I'll link a playlist in the description if you're interested in astrophotography without a tracker. But tonight, we will be using a star tracker, which makes astrophotography more convenient and should allow for better results as well. The only downside to the tracker is we do have to spend some time at the beginning of the night polar aligning the tracker for it to work correctly, because it has to rotate precisely around the celestial pole. And then we also have to be able to point our camera lens at the galaxy using only the controls on the star tracker here, which is not quite as intuitive as pointing with a ball head as we would be doing with untracked astrophotography. But I'll of course share lots of tips in this video to make using the star tracker as seamless and easy as possible. Okay, next up in our kit, we have the tripod. And there are many options here, of course, but if you want something cheap that will work well right out of the box, I'd suggest a used Bogen 3001 tripod off of eBay. I've had mine for 15 years and it's still working just as well as when I bought it used. And they go for about $50 US. And you don't need the tripod head if you're just using it for this purpose, for astrophotography. So if you see a good deal on just the tripod legs, that's all you need for this. But if you do get one with the head, it's very easy to remove just by unscrewing it, and then you would screw the star tracker on in the place of the tripod head. Lastly, we have a number of accessories. A number of these accessories are optional, but most I would recommend. The first here is a lens warmer. It's this thing wrapped around the front of the lens here. This is also sometimes called a dew heater band. And the purpose of this is just to keep the front element of your lens slightly warmer than the ambient temperature, which prevents condensation from forming on the glass and ruining your photos. If you live somewhere with humid air like I do here in New Hampshire, I'd say this is a must. If you live in an arid environment like the desert, then you probably don't need this. And then the lens warmer powers off a USB battery bank. And speaking of batteries, we have this one for the lens warmer. We also have one inside the DSLR, and I'd strongly recommend getting an extra for your DSLR. And then with this mount, the Star Adventurer tracker, it can power off 4 AA batteries, which is what I'm doing tonight, but it can also power off USB power 5 volts. If you're running it off AA batteries like me, I'd bring an extra set as well. The next accessory is a headlamp that has separate buttons for red light and white light. I like this one from Coast, but I think it has unfortunately been discontinued, but I'll just go through the reasons I like it and then maybe you can find one similar. I like it because it's simple, just 2 buttons, one for red light, one for white light, and then it also has a full range of motion for the light. From straight ahead, which is nice when you're just like first setting up, to straight down, which is how I have it most of the night. So if I'm with anyone, I'm not blinding them, but I can see exactly what I'm doing with the red light. Next is a clean white t-shirt or stack of white paper and a screen or tablet of some kind, like an iPad, that can produce an even white light that can completely cover the front of your lens. We'll use these items for taking something called flat frames, which I'll explain later. With this Tear 3, I could actually just use my iPhone set to a white screen, as it does cover the entire front of the lens. But if I had a smaller iPhone, like not the Max version, it probably wouldn't work. So in that case, a good cheap option, if you don't have a tablet like an iPad, is an LED tracing panel from Amazon or eBay, and these can be found for as little as $10 to $15 for a small one. I already mentioned the shutter release, but I'll mention it once more. Again, this in particular is optional. It depends on how you plan to take photos. If your camera has an internal interval timer, like in the menu, then you wouldn't need this. The next accessory is optional depending on where you are setting up and what kind of tripod you have. But I've found for this tripod, the Bogan 3001, if I'm setting up on soft, spongy ground, like a grassy field, I like having these 3 concrete blocks with me. And I set the whole kit up on these blocks, and these help prevent the kit from sinking slowly into the ground, which will throw off your polar alignment. And then the last accessory is called a Batonov mask, which is a focusing aid that is very useful, and it can be easily 3D printed like I did here for a few cents worth of filament, or you can buy a commercial one for under $20. The way a Batonov mask works is it diffracts the light of a star, which is a point source, into a useful pattern, and that diffraction pattern can tell you if your lens is out of focus or in focus for astrophotography. And if you're someone who's interested in the physics of light and diffraction, like we see with the Batonov mask, I think you'll enjoy this video's sponsor, Brilliant. My YouTube channel focuses on the how-to of astrophotography, obviously, but to really get the most out of astronomy, it can be a good idea to brush up on fundamental math, science, physics, and data analysis. And Brilliant will help you in all of those areas with thousands of interactive lessons that will help you get a little bit smarter every day. What is so cool about Brilliant is it's hands-on. It reinforces the lessons through actually working out the problems, not just memorizing some facts that you'll soon forget. And you can make it an easy daily habit because it's mobile friendly. So you can actually get smarter with your phone rather than getting dumber with it with all the brain rot we see on social media these days. I'd especially recommend the course on scientific thinking, which has a whole level on optics and light. And obviously that's related to what I'm talking about with astrophotography, and I learned a lot from that course. To try everything that Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/nebulaphotos or scan the QR code on screen. Or you can click on the link in the description. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription by using my link. Okay, so we've gone through now all the parts of the kit. What's next? Next is we need the right night in the right location to get the most out of this kit. And so there are 3 criteria here you should be paying attention to. 1, we want to be shooting the galaxy when the moon is either a new moon in its new moon phase, or it's not up in the sky. It's either already set or it hasn't risen yet. So we want a moonless sky because that is when the sky gets really, really dark. We also, to get the sky dark, want to get away from artificial light pollution, which is common if you live in the city, but if you can drive out to a field like in the country, a rural area, you can maybe escape the light pollution, and a good resource for finding a spot to do that is lightpollutionmap.info. And so when you're looking at that map, look for the cooler colors, like the blue areas. Blue and black are going to be your really dark areas. But even if you can go from like a hot white pink city to a green area, that's going to be a huge improvement too. 3, it needs to be clear. If there are clouds, they're going to obscure the night sky, of course, and stop us from photographing the galaxy. So my favorite resource to find when it's going to be clear in North America is astrospheric.com, which is a forecast designed for astronomers. And if you're outside of North America, you can check out clearoutside.com for a cloud forecast for your area. So if we've hit all 3 of those points, and we know where we're going for a dark sky and that the forecast is clear and that there's no moon, the next step is to set up everything inside. Double check before you leave that everything is working, that you have all of your batteries, all the batteries are charged, you have an SD card in your camera that has plenty of space on it, and once you're sure that your whole kit is ready to go, before you disassemble it, what I'd recommend is take a picture of it and make a very detailed packing list. And then pack your car, actually checking things off on the packing list, making sure that you have every piece of this kit packed. Now, does this seem like overkill? Well, I can't tell you how many times I've thought I've had everything in my astrophotography kit, even something as simple as this. Got into the dark sky site 2 hours away and then realized, oh darn, I forgot the tripod, or I forgot a battery, or whatever it is. And missing just one piece from this kit can be a showstopper. So make a packing list and make sure everything on your packing list is actually in the car before you drive away if you do travel to shoot, which I'm sure many people watching this do. Okay, now when you get to your dark sky location, the first step is getting the kit assembled. First step is I'm going to install this part on of the Star Adventurer onto my tripod legs. This is called the latitude base, and its purpose is to easily allow you to polar align the star tracker. You can see here it has markings for latitude, and I'd suggest looking up your latitude for the site you're at and roughly setting this to that. You can do this ahead of time. So I'm roughly at 43 degrees north, so I'll set my latitude base to that. Next, I'm gonna have to find a spot where I have a clear view to the north, because that's where Polaris, the North Star, which we'll be using for polar alignment, is, and it's also where the Big Dipper is for finding our galaxy. And so I want to point the latitude base here to the north, like this, with the dovetail saddle on the south side facing me. Once you have lined this up to roughly north or south in the southern hemisphere, you can optionally set your concrete blocks if you are worried about spongy ground like I am. If you were setting up like on a parking lot like concrete, you don't have to worry about this. Next, we'll add the motorized star tracker to the latitude base like this with the polar alignment scope cap here on our side, and just make sure that the tracker is tightened tightly into the dovetail clamp with this big knob right here. Then we'll slide the declination bracket into this part and tighten that up with this knob. And then we'll screw the counterweight shaft in to the bottom of the declination bracket right here and put this counterweight onto the shaft. Okay, we're almost done with construction. If you have a lightweight lens like this Canon 75-300, which is only 1 pound or 480 grams, you can just attach the camera directly to the declination bracket, and I have found this slight imbalance in declination is okay as long as it's well balanced in right ascension. However, with a heavier lens, I wouldn't suggest this. My Tier 3 here is 3 times the weight of this Canon lens at about 3 pounds or 1,400 grams. I plan to make some 3D printed rings for it, so then I could also do rotation, but I haven't gotten to that yet. So for now, I'm connecting it in a very simple style. There's a 3/8 inch connection here on the bottom of the lens, and then I've adapted to 1/4 inch with a little thread adapter, which lets me connect the lens rather than the camera to the declination bracket, and then that gets us very close to balance in the declination axis. Okay, to finish the assembly, we will attach the lens warmer around the front here, turn that on, and attach my shutter release to the camera here. Now let's go ahead and balance the mount in right ascension, which we'll do by moving this counterweight up and down on the shaft until it balances with the camera side. So to get a feel for this, first we have to loosen the right ascension clutch, which is this big black gear thing right here. And so with this loose, the trick is to just gently let it go, and we'll see if it's falling towards the counterweight side or the camera side. If it's falling to the camera side, as it is now, that means we need to move the counterweight down on the shaft. If it was moving towards the counterweight side, when we let it go, then we would move the counterweight up on the shaft until it starts balancing. When it's balanced, it will stop moving when you let it go. And at that point, you can lock down the counterweight with this big knob here on the side. And then we'll put it back in home position, just with the counterweight all the way down towards the tripod legs, and retighten the right ascension clutch right here. Again, this big black gear thing here. I find polar alignment is easiest during twilight before it gets totally dark. Polaris will be the first bright star due north visible. That makes it much easier to spot, because once it gets truly dark, there's so many stars to the north, Polaris can be a little bit harder to find, especially at a dark sky site. So if you do it during twilight, it'll be a lot easier. And then when you look through the polar scope at twilight, it's still easy to see the reticule, this little pattern printed in the polar scope, without any additional light. I've never really had good luck with the bright red illuminators. I like to just use natural twilight to light up the reticule. So I don't even turn the tracker on. What I do is I just download the SynScan Pro app on my phone, which is free. You open that up, go to Utilities, then Advanced, then Polar Scope, and it will show you where on the circle in the reticule Polaris should go when you're looking through the Polar Scope. So at 11 o'clock on the circle is where I should place Polaris right now. Then when I'm looking at the reticule in the Polar Scope, I ignore the orientation of the numbers and just put Polaris in the 11 o'clock position in the ring using the adjustments here on the latitude base. Now, I've talked to many people and many have told me they don't like doing it the way I do it because they find it confusing to have the orientation of the reticule in the Polar Scope not matching the orientation in the app. So it's no problem if you want to get them to match. Just carefully loosen the RA clutch here on the front of the tracker and then rotate an RA until the 0 hour is at 12 o'clock, just like in the app. Then tighten back up the RA clutch and then continue with polar alignment. Rotating an RA on the tracker does not in any way affect polar alignment. You can check polar alignment after you've gone to your target if you want. Polar alignment is accomplished entirely with the knobs on the latitude base. And this knob here in the front, this big knob, controls altitude. If it's not moving the altitude, you might just have to loosen this knob on the side. And then these knobs here control left to right, called azimuth. And you'll find that with these azimuth adjustments, they're a push-pull against a pin, so you can't just move one. You have to loosen one and then tighten the other to get the tracker to move left or right. But when you do this, you will see Polaris move in the Polar Scope, and again, the goal is to make it match this picture in the app, which adjusts automatically based on your local time, date, and location. Polar alignment does take some practice, but it's essential to get it at least pretty good for the tracker to work. The better your polar alignment, the longer each picture can be with round stars. Now for this tutorial, when we get to it, I'm going to just assume you're a beginner, so your polar alignment is decent, so-so, and show you even with decent polar alignment, we can still get very good results. We might not be able to do 2-3 minute exposures, but we don't need that. We can do 20-second, 30-second exposures and still get very good results. So sometimes I take my calibration frames at this point. Your calibration frames are, you might have heard these terms, darks, flats, bias. But since it's already dark and we're all ready to go, I'm going to take my calibration frames last for this session, after we have a couple of hours on the Galaxy. It really doesn't matter if you take the calibrations before or after your light frames, just whatever is convenient for you. And before I move on, just because I said light frames and I haven't mentioned what that means yet, I'll just go over a brief thing about terminology. If you ever hear the term lights or light frames, that means your photos of the deep sky object, of the galaxy. Another term you'll hear for this same thing is subs, which is short for sub-exposures. So subs, sub-exposures, lights, these all mean the same thing. They all mean the photos you take of the galaxy that you'll then calibrate with your calibration frames, align and stack to make one final picture. And all of that happens next week on the computer, but this week we need to capture all of those frames, all of the raw data to make that work, to make the stacking work. So we need our lights, the actual pictures of the galaxy, and then we need our darks, flats, and bias frames, our calibration frames, which we're going to take right after we take our lights. Okay, next up is focusing the camera lens. And I'll walk through two methods. One, if you're just doing it by eye through trial and error, and two, if you do have a Bahtinov mask, which is a cheap and useful focusing aid for focusing on the stars. Okay, if you're doing it by eye, the goal is to make the stars as small as possible, and with a bright enough star and zoomed in 10 times with digital zoom on live view, we can actually see this happening live. So as I move the focuser, you can see the star get smaller and then bigger again as I move past the best point of focus. Now, when you get close to the best point of focus, it can be a bit confusing with a lens like this one since it has considerable chromatic aberration, which is this magenta ring around the star. But seeing that magenta ring around a bright star is actually a pretty good indication that you are in focus. Now, to really dial this in without a mask, I like to turn on tracking which is just this dial here on the side, turn it to the star, and do trial and error with test shots at 3 to 5 seconds long. A longer exposure will show a bunch more stars than live view, and that will really help you to know if you're in focus, since we can zoom in even further in playback mode. And this is a picture of what you want to see zoomed all the way in. This shot is in focus, so it gives you an idea of all the little pinpoint stars that you should see when you're in focus. I'll just show a comparison now on screen of what out of focus versus in focus looks like. So if you're way out of focus, you're gonna still see stars, but they'll look like donuts, right? They'll have this appearance where they're darker in the middle and brighter, have a brighter ring like a donut. That's not what you wanna see. You wanna see many pinpoint stars when you zoom in. Okay, method 2 is my preferred method, which is the Batonov mask. With a bright enough star and a dark enough sky, you should be able to do this in live view. But if not, you can always take test exposures and look at them in playback, just like we were with the other method. The goal is to get this center line right in the middle of the X pattern. And as you can see now in this test exposure, I'm slightly to the right of center. So I'm going to make a very small adjustment to the focus, and then through this trial and error, we should be able to get it well centered like this. Now, again, since this lens has considerable chromatic aberration, you can see the pattern isn't perfect. It's a bit messy. But the key thing to look for is that this extended line is centered in the X pattern. Once you see that, you can remove the Batonov mask and know that you are in focus. It's best to check this every so often, checking focus, because changes in temperature through the night can throw off your focus. Now that we're focused, let's find the pinwheel galaxy. It's also known as Messier 101. And M101 isn't particularly hard to find, but I would suggest hooking up some kind of finder device to your DSLR if using a prime lens like I am. If you're using a zoom lens, you probably don't need a finder for finding Messier 101, because if you zoom all the way out to, for instance, 70 millimeters and you're using live view as your finder device, you should be able to center up the galaxy at 70 millimeters and then zoom all the way in once you're centered correctly. Since I'm in a place that isn't in a major flight path and I know how to use a green laser responsibly, that's what I am using. But if you're at all concerned about that, a red dot style finder can work just as well. Before we start finding the galaxy, let me familiarize you with how to point the star tracker, because it doesn't move like a normal tripod head since it's using an equatorial coordinate system rather than an alt-azimuth one. But we can point the lens anywhere in the night sky because we are working with two axes to work with here for pointing. Right ascension is this axis, the one rotating around the celestial pole, and declination is this axis. And on a star tracker, this axis isn't motorized. It's just a manual movement for getting your camera pointed at the right spot. When you're making a big move, you're going to want to carefully loosen both the right ascension clutch, which is here, and the declination clutch, which is here. And pay attention here because there's these two knobs, so we want not this smaller one, which will actually loosen up the connection to the lens, but this bigger one here, and that will loosen up the actual clutch. But when you're doing this, be careful not to bump the tripod or the tracker, because we've already polar aligned it and we don't want to have to redo polar alignment. I'm sure this is a common mistake that beginners make, is when they're actually just finding the object, they bump the whole tripod and then polar alignment is off. Okay, with the clutches loosened, you can now make your big move to get this roughly pointed at your target and check it with your finder device. And then once you have it on target, you can re-tighten the clutches. From here, to fine-tune declination, you can use this little knob right here. And to fine-tune right ascension, you'll want to turn the tracker on, so start tracking, and then you can use these two buttons to fine-tune right ascension. So I usually make my big move with the tracker off, and then I turn the tracker on to the star icon on the dial, which is the sidereal rate, which is what you want. And then I fine tune from there. So to find the pinwheel, We're going to start with the Big Dipper asterism, also called the Plough in Ursa Major, and we'll go to the second to last star in the handle called Mizar, which is easy to know if you found it correctly because it's a binary star system. Well, not actually, but it seems like one with Alcor, and they're both quite bright. So when you've located this pair, you know that you're on Mizar. From a dark sky, you can even see Mizar and Alcor naked eye. From there, we want to move to here. So if you look at the bigger picture, we're basically pointing the camera at this empty patch of sky, but it makes an almost equatorial triangle with Mizar and Alkaid, the two last stars in the Big Dipper's handle. So I'm just looking at where my green laser is pointed at the sky. And now I just keep adjusting the declination and right ascension with those subtle buttons and the little knob on the side here until the green laser is right here. And once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and take a 5-second test shot and look for the galaxy in playback mode. Okay, and I don't see it. So here's a good way to troubleshoot. With this test shot, go to playback mode, have it zoomed all the way out, and now take a photo of your DSLR screen with your smartphone, open that photo up in your photo app and crop it so it's just the DSLR screen, nothing else, and save that photo. Now open your web browser and go to nova.astrometry.net/upload. Click Browse, pick your photo that you just took, and click Upload. Now wait for the photo to plate solve. That means it recognizes the stars in the photo. And once it's done, you go down here and click on View in Worldwide Telescope. So now this shows me where my photo is in the sky, where I'm centered actually, and how far off I am from the Pinwheel Galaxy, which you can see right here. This view is turned around 180 degrees from my sky, which is why my picture is upside down in this view, but I can now at least see where the galaxy is compared to my photo. It's just off the edge here of where my camera is pointed right now. And so I'm about far down and off Mizar, but I'll have to move right in the direction of Alkaid to center up the galaxy. So let's give that a try. We're gonna just do some subtle adjustments here, take another test shot, and after the test shot comes up, we'll go to playback mode, zoom in, and yes, there is the galaxy, and it's pretty centered actually. If we wanted to, we could keep adjusting a little bit to get it even more centered, but for me, once I have it fairly centered, that's good enough. I'm on continuous shooting mode, and again, I'm just gonna lock the shutter release and let the camera rip for maybe half an hour or so. And then after half an hour, I'm gonna pause it and check focus again. Now, if you are a beginner and you try the 20-second pictures like I did and the stars aren't round and you're frustrated because they're little lines instead of round when you really zoom in, it's probably polar alignment error. So probably something happened where either you got it perfect and then it got bumped, or you didn't get it perfect in the first place. So if you have very long lines, you can pause what you're doing and check your polar alignment and try to fix it. Make sure that you're actually on Polaris, or you can just try shorter sub-exposures. Even if you have to go down to 15 seconds, 10 seconds, 8 seconds, that's okay. The key thing is getting pictures with round stars. If your stars aren't round, they're probably not going to align together in the stacking software. So the really key thing here is don't take a bunch of pictures where the stars are little lines, because that's not going to work. They have to be round. So even if you have to take shorter pictures to do that, go for it. And the other key is getting enough data. So I would say taking at least an hour total of sub-exposures to stack is how you're going to get a good picture. But the more the better. If we can get 2 hours, that's great. If you want to keep shooting the galaxy all night and you have the stamina to do that, go for it. The longer you shoot it, the more you can bring out in terms of details when we get to processing. Okay, but leave some time in the night for calibration frames. If you're doing 20-second subs like me, the calibration frames will take about 15 minutes to capture. If you were doing 1-minute subs though, the calibration frames would take like half an hour. or 40 minutes or something like that. Because the longer your sub-exposures, the longer the darks are going to be, and it just takes longer. But anyways, let's start with flats. Flats are very important to do before you disassemble the lens from the camera, because if there's any dust on the camera sensor, we don't want that dust to move. We want to capture the dust as it is, just as it is right now, because flats will correct for any dust bunnies on the sensor as long as that dust hasn't changed its position. So to take flats, we're going to turn tracking off and loosen the clutches, both the right ascension and declination clutch, to put the lens in a straight up position. Then we'll put our phone or tablet or tracing panel, whatever you're using as a white screen, on top of the lens. Now, if your screen is adjustable and you can make it quite dim, you may be good to go. But in most cases, I put some white diffusion material, either cloth or paper, between the lens and the screen because it allows for the flat frames to be long enough to avoid issues with banding from the screen refresh rate, which basically means the screens, any screen you have, TV, monitor, whatever, your phone, is actually flickering very fast. It's turning off and on very quickly, too quickly for us to notice. That's called the refresh rate. But a camera can pick that up. So diffusing the brightness with some kind of even white cloth or paper or frosted plexiglass, something like that, will allow us to take a proper flat without issues. To get a flat long enough to avoid any issues with a digital screen, what I go for is 1/13 of a second or longer. And to dial in the actual true exposure length, it can be anything from 1/13 of a second or longer. What you're looking for is, if you hold down the shutter button halfway, is for the exposure meter to be around 0 EV or a little bit brighter, up to about 2/3 of an EV is fine. And the only thing you're adjusting to make it that, to hit that exposure, is more diffusion or the shutter speed. Don't change your ISO or aperture to get this. Okay, so this flat looks good, so I'm going to take about 20 flats. Okay, next up we have biases and darks, and for both of these we want no light hitting the camera sensor. So you can, if you have it, just put a lens cap on your lens to take your darks and bias. I actually don't have a lens cap for this lens, so I'm going to actually remove the camera from the lens and put the body cap on the camera and take them that way. And I actually often do it this way because then I can, while the camera's taking darks, I can go ahead and pack up everything else. Okay, so let's start though with the bias frames. And for these, we're gonna just leave the ISO at 6400, but set the shutter speed to as fast as the camera will go, which in this case is 1/4000th of a second. And I'm gonna take about 40 of these bias frames. Okay, with those done, which was quite quick, I'm gonna take a quick separation frame just by opening up the camera and shining my light at the sensor and snapping a picture. And this will be a quick way to see where the bias frames end and where the dark frames begin. So we won't actually use this picture, it's just sort of a way to separate the bias frames and dark frames visually. Okay, to take darks, leave the ISO alone at 6400, set the shutter speed back to 20 seconds or whatever length exposure you used for taking your light frames, your actual pictures of the galaxy. And then I'll take about 30 of these. If you're rushed for time, you don't need 30, taking 20 would be fine too. 20 is basically my minimum for darks. Now you may be wondering, since you're taking these darks with just the body cap on, couldn't you take them tomorrow in your house? And the answer is probably no. We need to match the temperature of the lights. So if you want to do them at a later date, you need to take note of the ambient temperature right now and find a different night where the temperature is that same temperature, and then let the camera acclimate to that temperature and then take the darks. So darks have to be temperature matched to your light frames. Bias frames, though, can be taken any time and reused for all of your different astrophotography projects. Bias frames are not temperature sensitive. So as long as you're at the same ISO as your lights, bias frames can be used for multiple projects over and over again. Okay, and the darks are now done at 20 seconds each. 30 darks took 10 minutes to shoot. And we're now done with the calibration frames. So we did the flats, the bias, and the darks. So next week, we'll continue with this project on the computer, and I'm going to be demoing the newest releases of some free astrophotography software. And so we'll be processing this data of the Pinwheel Galaxy with Serial 1.4 Beta 1, Graxpert 3.1 Release Candidate 2, StarNet version 2.0, and GIMP 3.0.4. All of these programs are cross-platform, and you can prepare for next week by installing them on your computer now, but I'll also be demonstrating how to install them in that video for Windows and Mac OS, just to make sure that there's no confusion there and everyone can proceed with the tutorial. Since this video is over 20 minutes long, you're now seeing the names of everyone who supports this channel on patreon.com/nebulaphotos. Patreon members get a bunch of exclusive benefits like one-on-one messaging support with me, tons of additional channels on my Discord server, including the monthly imaging challenge, a Zoom call with the whole Patreon community the first Sunday of every month. And that's just a list of some of the benefits. All of those are available starting at $1 a month. There's also other additional benefits for other tiers, like early and ad-free videos starts at $7 a month. So I think it would be well worth checking out if you do appreciate what I'm offering on this YouTube channel. So that's it for this one. See you next week for the processing of the Pinwheel Galaxy with free open source software. As always, this has been Nico Carver. Clear skies.